I'll just start.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Robin Boehler with Mercer Island Group, and before Steve jumps in with a few kind of slides to set the context of what we're going to talk about today, I would love to have our panel introduce themselves to you. Two of them will talk about who they are and which agencies are on their roster. The third is from an agency. She'll talk a little bit about kind of the mix of how often she's part of a roster and what that looks like for her agency. So why don't we just kind of go down the line.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Chip Schuman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Sargento, the cheese company up in Wisconsin. I've been there for 16 years. And we have kind of a complicated agency roster. We have a lead strategic and creative agency, which is Ogilvy out of Chicago. They actually just recently picked up our public relations business as well. So it's good to have a couple of functions under one roof. We also have, and we've been with them for about 6 years. We also have a consumer promotion agency called In Marketing, which we've been with for 4 years. We have a digital agency called iCrossing, also out of Chicago, who we've been with for going on 2 years. And then we have a media agency, MediaCom, out of New York, which we've been with for 10 years.
Thank you.
Yep.
Amy.
Hi, I'm Jamie McGarry. I come from DDB, and I lead new business across the U.S. We have a range of clients from big to small, from State Farm and McDonald's to Miller Lite and Mars. And we have quite a different, I would say, mix of rosters we're on. Some, we are the lead agency. Some, it's just us and a media agency. And some, we have probably 8 other agencies with us. So we have a wide range of experience there.
Thanks. Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Eiselein. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Product Development for VTech. We create electronic learning toys under the VTech and LeapFrog brands. We have 3 major agencies that we retain. Empower is our media agency, our new media agency this year. We actually just made a transition, and they handle all media. And we have Silton and Partners, who handles our TV creative for the most part. And then Coin, who is Coin PR, handles our PR, and they've been with us for about 8 years now.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm Steve Boehler from the Mercer Island Group, and I'm absolutely just thrilled to be here to talk about client-agency relationships. This is a topic that is just a huge passion point for me personally. It is for our company. It's a core belief of ours that in the ideal world, they're all long and wonderful, and everybody's happy, and we're all making a lot of money. In my background, I was lucky enough to have started my career with 10 years of brand management at Procter & Gamble. And a core belief of the Procter & Gamble system was that the people working on the business with their agencies, the brand managers, the group product managers, the advertising managers, they couldn't hire or fire an agency. It was simply expected that they make it work, that they make the relationship work in order to get great work, in order to build the business. And those were the 3 expectations. And it was so significant in the culture and in the operation that as a brand manager, if the work coming out of the agency wasn't very good, there was a pretty good chance I was going to hear about it in my performance review. And as a brand manager, if the work wasn't very good and the relationship wasn't very good, I was definitely going to hear about it in my performance review. And this notion that the relationship drives the work and drives the business is core to what we believe in, and we believe it's core to a core issue for the industry. This is so important. I wanted to call out a quote from a great book by Robert Solomon called The Art of Client Service. And I think he captured this idea really well when he said in that great book 10 years ago, I used to think that great work led to great relationships. Now I think the opposite. Great relationships lead to great work. This is a critical theme, and it's so important because at any given moment in time, roughly 1/3 of clients are thinking about changing agencies. You just heard the tenure stats that Mark was talking about. This is a strategic imperative to our industry to develop longer-lasting relationships that are better for our people, better for our businesses, and better for our clients' businesses. Now, since 1/3 of clients are thinking about changing agencies at any given moment in time, There's a lot of movement in our industry. Mark just mentioned that. And there's a lot of reasons that people change agencies. Everything from the leadership challenges that we know of, the new CMO, the new CEO, to troubled business results, to the relationship being strained, to some perception that the agency relationship just isn't up to par. And there is not one single thing that can insulate us from all of those challenges. However, a great relationship with great work and strong business results will help us insulate our business from almost all of those. And it is the best antidote to the massive amount of movement that happens in our industry and to these kinds of challenges. The top one on the list, this client CMO change, is especially relevant today in a lot of ways because, as we've heard a lot, the CMO of today is different than the CMO of yesterday. It's different than the CMO of 10 years ago. Today's CMO is in sync with the rest of the C-suite. They're not going around talking about advertising. They're not talking about a 30 or a 15. They're talking about the key metrics that everybody else in the C-suite's talking about, whether it's revenue or shareholder value or market share. But these are big, giant metrics that they're worrying about day in and day out. So because of that, our relationships with our agency relationships with clients have this shadow hanging over them at all times today about return on investment. There's a constant need for return on investment that's different than it used to be. And when we look at what makes up the client-agency relationship return on investment, it really is just a series of activities and processes that are what drive the business. We are an hours business, really. Some of us are lucky enough to have other arrangements, but mostly it's an hours business. And how effective we are for ourselves and on our clients' behalf determines how effective our agency is and how profitable our agency is. Every single process or activity on this list can either positively or negatively contribute to the ROI of that relationship. And as a result, we have to think hard about how our relationships and our process are either positively or negatively driving the business. A good example on this list is briefings and guidance. There's actually research that suggests that 1/3 of agency time is wasted by poor client briefing and guidance. What does that mean? That means a $3 million retainer is delivering $2 million in work. And there just isn't a business model that effectively allows $3 million of investment to deliver $2 million of outcome on a continuous basis without the agency getting fired. So that's part of what's at stake here. Now, so the question might be, I want to be a great partner. I want to have a great partner. What does it take to be great partners against this backdrop of this new CMO that's so focused on ROI, that's so focused on business results? Yesterday, we saw that there was a great slide that showed that the amount of work that clients need is going up dramatically, the amount of content, and the fees are coming down. So how do we do this? How are we great partners? We wrote a white paper a few years ago after having researched senior agency executives and client executives. We found that there are 7 characteristics of great partners. They maintain philosophical alignment. They're on the same page. They speak in one voice. There's a consistency to how they operate. There's clarity in their jobs, the roles, the expectations, the scope, the communications. Processes are critical, and they are strategically aligned. Those are core characteristics, but the question then becomes, what is the model that we can use to put those to work? How do we really operationalize these characteristics into a client-agency relationship model that will help ourselves and help our clients' business? And so this is the roadmap, and I promise you, if you work this roadmap, if you work on this roadmap, your relationships will be better, the work is going to be better, and your business and your clients' businesses will be better. It starts with the right onboarding and expectation setting. So from the start of the relationship, we've got to get it right. And I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how to do the right onboarding. At the end, there's this constant focus on the business. We've got to know what our clients' business issues are. It's not about ads, and it's not about communications. There's some business issue that they need help with. That's why they are paying us. Nobody wants to hire an advertising agency just to hire an advertising agency. There's some business issue they're trying to address. Now, in the middle of those two, between the onboarding and between the business outcomes, there's both daily activities that deserve a constant focus, as well as annual special events. On the daily basis, there's the notion of ongoing client agency feedback. This needs to be bi-directional. You need to have a cadence built in. You have to have a plan to do this. If you don't plan to do this, it's not going to happen, and communication is going to go afoul, and everything's going to fall apart. At the same time, the team, the agency and the client teams together need to have a constant focus on both processes as well as on the people. This is a people business in service of the business. And so we have to have a constant focus on the people, their training, the processes they're using, and how we're going to communicate together. And if you do all of that on a day-to-day basis, that's the hard work. The annual stuff that's in the middle here isn't easy, but it's very easy compared to the hard day-to-day work that goes into building one of these roadmaps. In the middle, the annual events are important because they help us focus. So there's the annual 360. And the annual 360, it's both of us evaluating each other, preferably managed by an external partner so that there's confidentiality. Those 360s should be triggering a specific discussions where we get together with our client partners and we talk about how we're going to build the relationship and the business now that we know how we're doing on an annualized basis. Those enhancement meetings should trigger really specific enhancement initiatives. We need to decide in those meetings what are the 2 or 3 critical extra things we need to do for the business, whether it's a new process or a new program or something new for the business. Put a team against it, assign accountability, and track it, and then get going with the business. Now, I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit about the onboarding agenda. When we manage searches, one of the services we often provide is also to help onboard the new agency with the client. And over time, having done this for close to 30 years, we've developed some really core principles about how to do it well. Some of it is obvious. We've got to make sure the expectations are clear. We've got to make sure that the business orientation happens, that people know everything they need to know about the business to be able to start working on the business. And of course, the scope has to be clear. There's some other stuff that we've found innovated our way towards, having done this a lot, that I would suggest you make sure is a core part of your onboardings. The first is a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Don't leave your onboarding session without the client and the agency teams establishing a crystal clear 30, 60, 90-day plan about what's going to happen, who's going to do it, when it's going to happen, and how we're going to check in on it. So there's clear accountabilities. We know exactly what we're going to do for the business, as well as what we're going to do for the relationship. So there's going to be some outstanding onboarding stuff that has to happen. That's the stuff about the relationship. If people are assigned, we know it's going to happen. There's stuff that has to happen in that first 30 days on the business because every client needs faster impact, faster results. So that's got to be a core part of this onboarding. The other stuff I would mention are some softer stuff. For example, we really need to cover the etiquette of the business. Nobody talks about this, but what does same day mean? What does close a business mean? How do I find you in a crisis? What's the best way to communicate? I've got some clients where text is the best way to communicate. Some it's the cell phone. The problem is you can't wait until you have to find them to figure out how to find them. You have to know this stuff in advance. The other thing I would mention is this notion of vows. One of the things that Robin, my wonderful partner, helped innovate in our onboardings was this notion of the clients and agencies coming together and actually taking vows as part of the onboarding. And they work collaboratively to develop these vows to establish, it's like getting married. What's important in the relationship to me, and what's important in the relationship to you? And how do we talk about that? How do we agree on it? How do we put it on paper? How do we sign our name to that? And then later on, a great example of this is for a big retailer where we managed a review about a year ago. Their 360 is about to kick off, and they're building into their 360 some stuff about the vows. How are we doing on the vows? Are we adhering to the vows? Does everybody on the team understand the vows? Do they know how to live and act the vows? Another core part of a relationship management program is day-to-day feedback. This is really, really hard. And so you need a cadence for how you're going to make sure that you're establishing a feedback program that covers both annual stuff as well as quarterly or monthly stuff and day-to-day work. On the annual side, it's more formal, and it's probably the 360 I mentioned. Depending upon how the business is structured and what the cadence of the business is, there may be appropriate quarterly check-ins. Certainly, you want a monthly call leader to leader. You want that top-to-top call to happen every single month, just the check-in. It could be 5 minutes, it could be 50 minutes, but it's how are things going? What do I need to know about as a leader to make sure that this is working? And then the really hard part is that day-to-day feedback. And it's really hard because nobody gets trained in how to give feedback these days. Not in big companies, not in big or small agencies. It's one of the lost arts with the reduction in training budgets over the last 20 years. So we really encourage agencies and their partners to make it imperative that there actually is training in how do you give feedback so that we can tackle the tough issues directly, respectfully, and get on with business. If you do this roadmap, you will end up in a virtuous business cycle where from the day-to-day feedback to the ongoing enhancement sessions to the annual 360, everything's working together and the business is getting better. And this is really just a roadmap that's telling us we've got to talk on a day-to-day basis with our clients. We have to do it directly and specifically. Now, in terms of some action items, most of the audience are agencies, so I wanted to leave you with 4 things to do immediately or to think about immediately. And first one is to start right. You absolutely have to onboard the client appropriately, or you have to be onboarded appropriately. You have to work with your new clients to do this. I would frankly suggest that onboarding should be sort of an ongoing activity. So while it's core at the beginning of the relationship, there's no reason why with major changes in personnel or major changes in product line or with major changes in scope, you shouldn't be revisiting the onboarding idea, getting everybody in the same room and refiguring out, either reminding yourself of what's working really well and work on the stuff that's not working really well. You need, obviously, to put into place daily, weekly, monthly, and annual feedback mechanisms. There should never be surprises, just like in an individual's performance review. Everybody should know where they stand. Everybody should have the respect of having an opportunity to do better in the moment, as opposed to 6 months later. We've got to figure out how to measure performance and how to measure service, and obviously proactively address problems and opportunities. That comes from the day-to-day feedback. It also comes from having our leaders check in on a monthly basis. Thank you for your time. We will move it over to the panel.
Thank you. All right. So now let's hear how it really works. So this is what Steve presented, obviously, is from our perspective looking across clients and agencies. But now we'll hear from the folks who are actually in the trenches. So I've got a couple of questions to start out. So let's talk a little bit about the role of the client. Since most of our audience here is our agency folks, how do you each see the role of the client? What role does the client play in a great relationship between client and agency? So why don't we start with Chip and we'll just scope the line.
Sure. I think that the client really sets the tone, to be honest, and I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of the process when we're in a search in terms of opening ourselves up to the agencies that are competing, making sure they know who we are as people and as a company. You know, Sargento is a third-generation family-owned company, and our founder had this philosophy to hire good people and treat them like family. And it's something that we've really held on to as we've grown from a little regional brand to a national player. And that extends to our agency relationships. We really want people to feel like, people from the agencies to feel like a part of our team and to feel like a part of our family. So, you know, a lot of little things, to be honest, like even just how we introduce ourselves when there's an agency pitch. You know, I don't say, I'm Chip Schuman, I'm the Senior VP of Marketing. We actually present slides. They're called, you know, About Me slides, where it's, here's who my family is, here's the things that I care about, the things that I'm interested in. And it makes such a difference from the start, and like I was saying, really sets the tone from the beginning that this is about getting to know each other as people and not just a business relationship.
Great, thank you. Jamie, what does it look like from the agency? What role does the client play in whether or not this works?
Well, like you said, I think that does set the tone. A lot of times agencies are looking to the client to do that, set the tone. How do you want to move forward? What is your culture? What is important to you? And then we're going to try to match that up. So I think, I think it's hugely important. But I think it's also important for agencies to be honest with themselves. A lot of times I think we try to match it up so much where maybe there isn't a match. And I think we need to be honest with ourselves to say, is this a right fit for us culturally and for the criteria that we've got?
We can tell when it's not real.
I know you can.
That's great.
Yeah.
Jen?
I would absolutely agree on setting the tone. I think it's also important for the client to kind of set the table too, and that is laying out really clearly what are the objectives and what are the drivers and what's going to be a measure of success, and setting the tone for open communication as well. That's really critical. We have to be able to take feedback as well as give feedback and set the example of how you can communicate, because that open dialogue, active listening is really going to be the key to getting to good solutions.
Now, as I expected, I have questions here, but you have questions, and they're coming up fast. So I want to go to your questions in just a minute. I want to ask one more. I know you guys, I sent you a bunch of questions, but I think I'd rather be responsive to the group than just come up with our questions. The one question I want to ask before we jump to those is, what is it like, I'm going to ask Jamie first, what is it like to give a client feedback that they're writing crappy briefs or that they're not giving you what you need on time? What's it like to give a client hard to hear feedback?
Well, I think it depends on the type of relationship that you have, and I think it goes back to, like Steve said, having the good relationships and trying to set those early on. I think if there's a good empathy and trust in that relationship, it's easier. And frankly, when you have that, you get to better work, and you can have those open and transparent conversations. Sometimes, it can be difficult, and hopefully there are tools and support in place within your agency and client teams to be able to have those conversations, because it's imperative for everyone's success.
Yeah, and so before I ask the folks from the client side to this very same question, one of the things that we've seen in the work that we do, so as Steve mentioned, we do reviews, right? And then we do onboardings sometimes, and we manage 360. Sometimes we get to actually stay with the client through the entire process. We do everything. And then sometimes we do what we call marriage counseling, right? So when things aren't going so well, how do we fix it? Because it's a lot better to try to fix something than it is to break it all up and start over. So one of the interesting things that I often hear from agencies is we can't give the client hard to hear feedback, they'll fire us. I've never seen it happen, actually, but I'd love to hear from the clients so that you guys can hear straight from them. What's your expectation around hard to hear feedback? What's it like to get hard to hear feedback from the agency? How should agencies be thinking about giving you feedback that you're not doing a great job as a client? So let's start with Jen and we'll come back to Chip.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's critical that they feel able and that we're willing to hear that feedback, because it is a partnership, it is an equal relationship, and if they're not happy or something's not working from the agency end, it's not going to prove out to be well for us from the client end either. So it's critical that we try to understand what the impact is of what we're doing that's not working, and try to make that change, and if we can't, help our partner understand the whys behind it that might get us to a better solution.
I've fired every agency that ever gave me feedback.
So glad we invited you.
Yes. No, I think that feedback is a gift. I demand feedback. I think it's really important. I would almost feel like if you're on the agency side and you're uncomfortable about giving the feedback, it might even be a sign that the relationship isn't quite where it needs to be, because it should be something very natural. It should be a two-way dialogue, and just like we're giving the agency feedback, the agency should be giving us feedback. I take it very seriously. We actually just had a review, our annual 360 review with one of our agencies, and it was a little nice, and I said point blank, tell me 3 things that we can be doing differently. I know there's something that we can do differently, and we want to hear about it, and it's important, so love to get the feedback.
So there you go. So let's jump over to Slido, if you guys want to put that up so people can see what the questions are. So the very first question, how do you respond to clients who treat and believe you're a vendor and not a partner? Who wants to go first?
I don't even understand that, because that's not a good way to think about it. I don't ever think of an agency as, they are my agency partner. That's the only way to have a good relationship, but to also then get good business results.
I'd look for clients who think of you as a partner instead of a vendor. I don't know. That's very alien to me too, to be honest. Like I've always considered my agencies to be partners, really even more than a partner, to be just an extension of my team. I think the sign of a good relationship is when even that kind of wall goes down and it's not about agency and client, but just one team. And that is really how I think about my agency. So I'm not sure how I would respond to that.
What do you do, Jamie?
So it's not foreign to me. I think it does start with, one of the barriers we as agencies face is a lot of times we are considered vendors, or when we interact with procurement, that's the term they use. I think we need to challenge ourselves to prove that we are business partners and business minded, and we can come up with business solutions. And I think that's how you earn that seat at the table, and to have those discussions and break from that stereotype.
That's great, thank you. This one's for you, Steve. Can you explain further what you see as the difference between relationship vows and KPIs?
Sure, that's a good question. I think of the KPIs as what we're trying to accomplish as a team together. Think of the vows as principles that are going to guide how we are going to work together to get to whatever those KPIs are. This could be stuff as simple as we will give direct and honest feedback on a daily basis. It could be more romantic wording than that. Whatever, it depends upon the teams involved. But this is more about us putting a passionate stake in the ground about how we're going to be people that work effectively with other people. And that's why we like to call them, Robin calls them vows, where we like to call out the similarity between marriage vows, because no marriage vow gets into a KPI. This is all about how we're going to be with each other. And so that's the difference.
Yeah. Procurement. Do you see procurement as a help or a hindrance in that process of agency partnership?
Yeah, I think even just the word procurement is the wrong word for partnership. To me, procurement is film and packaging, and ingredients, not about relationships. So I guess just my experience at Sargento is procurement is not involved in helping us with our partnerships, and it's something that is done very differently than the way a procurement agreement would work.
Jamie?
I would say we have to deal with procurement. It's a reality of today. And I think we need to take a holistic approach. I think from what, the discussions we've had and the experiences we've had, no pitch has been won or lost simply by procurement and their decision. It's a checkbox and a factor that we have to consider. But I think, if you're providing that value, the client is going to be able to work with procurement to rationalize their decision. It's sometimes hard to work with them. We're a service-based industry, and that's, I don't think, the intention of where procurement started, but it is a reality of today.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Chip. It's kind of the last piece. It's not a driver in any partnership decisions that we make. It's really about the chemistry and the relationship first, and what each party's bringing to the table. It's kind of after the fact.
I feel like clients don't appreciate true customer service anymore. They see it as added costs, not added value. Everything is costs. Is that true? Jamie, why don't you jump on that one first? What's your view of it?
Well, we're in a service industry, like I said, and I think we just have to keep in mind the consistent level of service that we are offering clients, and bringing that value and demonstrating that every step of the way. Beyond that, that's as much as we can do.
Okay. Jen?
As a client that has really tiny budgets, I will say it is often a challenge. We really try to understand the levels of service that are provided, and we know what we get. And we don't there's not a lack of value there. The challenge is making the trade-offs to fit into the overall budget that you have, and sometimes you have to make those decisions to settle for less in some services, but that also should be an honest dialogue between partners to say, we know that we're giving up some service level because of the budget we're at. Do we want to continue this? Is this still viable for both parties?
I mean, I think the reality is there is definitely pressure on costs, but I don't think it's in a client's best relationship to negotiate a deal with an agency that isn't good for you guys, to be honest, because then I think you don't get the good work. So to me, it's just about being very clear on what the scope of work is, paying a fair value for that. And if that is more than what I can afford, then it's about looking at the scope and changing the scope and figuring out which of that needs to go. But it can't be one-sided. It's just not going to work if it's just good for the client.
You know, it's a really interesting question to me as someone who gets called in to help a client find a new agency. I mean, it's what I do most days of the week. So client service, when a client asks for a new agency, they come to us and they say, we're looking for a new agency. I've never heard a client say, and they can skimp on client service. I don't really care. I've never heard that. Is it a differentiator in a pitch? No, it's table stakes. But once you are in a relationship with a client, it can be the one and only thing that costs you the business. And I have so many examples. I could be up here the rest of the day with examples of agencies that blew it because there wasn't enough attention paid to the client, either because they put a junior team on after they had had a senior team on. And I don't necessarily even mean the pitch team swap. I mean a senior team, but then they've had the client for a long time, so they start to train people on it, or just consistent turnover. On the client team, you know, on the agency side, on the account team, and the client has to onboard the new agency people over and over and over again. Turnovers happens in agencies, but if it feels seamless to the client, they don't notice nearly as much. So it's interesting. The idea, I've never had a client say to me, I think account service costs too much, ever. There are other things they think cost too much, but not account service. So it's an interesting question. What are some ways to turn a client-agency relationship around once it's gone south? That's a great question. Jen, why don't you start?
Yeah, I would love to have been on both sides of this, where we have turned it around and where we haven't. And the first thing we do, is one of the things Steve talked about, is actually have that kind of facilitated, we'll call it marriage counseling, continue the theme. But if both parties come to the table and are really honest about what the issues are and are really invested in working through those, it absolutely can, and it has worked for me. Where it doesn't is if either party walks out of that room not really engaged in the change that's been agreed upon, it's never going to turn it back around.
Good. Jamie?
I would say that a few things are key to trying to turn that around. I think number one is transparency. You need to be able to have honest conversations, and if you haven't until this point, you need to. I think you need to also have some accountability and own what's gotten you to this point, whether that's agency, client side, but we need to have honest conversations and own it. And then I think, clear action plans with steps and micro steps on how we're going to correct this and improve it, and then making sure that we're tracking that to say, are we making progress? Are things changing? And then finally learn from it. Whether it's, whether you save it or not, you need to learn to make sure it doesn't happen on this piece of business or another one again, because I think it can be avoided.
I think some of it depends on how far south it's gone. I think that if it's just sort of a bump in the road, I've seen it get corrected quite easily, and to me it'd be the same types of things that you would think about in a real relationship. It's about communication and good, honest discussion, acceptance of what you're hearing and not being defensive. Sometimes I think it can be a change in personnel if maybe just the relationship wasn't working right for whatever reason. But I've also seen it when it can't be repaired, and I think when it becomes irreparable is when there's just been a loss of trust, I think, and I think that's pretty hard to come back from, but I think that something pretty big would have to happen for there to be a complete loss of trust.
What's the one thing agencies do that bothers you? We'll give this one to the two client side folks. Yep.
Well, the first thing that pops in my mind, and I saw an earlier question that has now disappeared, but it was about how do you keep all the agencies in their lanes? And so what I think about, like what bothers me the most is lack of integration. It's really important for all the agencies to work together, and it's kind of funny, like this discussion is agency-client relationship. I think agency-agency relationship is just as important, especially when you have a stable of different agencies. So I would say the thing that bugs me the most is when plans come back and they're not integrated, they don't all hold together. It's very clear this agency did slide 1, this agency did slide 2, and it doesn't all feel like one idea coming back to us.
Jen?
From my end, it's more of something they don't do, and it often for me is a harbinger of where the relationship is going to go, and that is not engage on the bigger business objectives and not show interest in understanding what the goals are for the organization. When we write a brief, we actually put what that objective is, what that goal is for that given product in that given time period, and the intention would be to share that information, talk about how is it progressing, what are we doing that's working and not. And if there's not any interest in that, I question if there's really interest in being a partner.
The next one for the clients. Sorry, Jamie, we'll get back to you, I
All right.
promise. Are your teams trained in how to nurture partnerships with agency partners and effectively manage scopes, or does this fall to the agencies? Want to go first?
Sure. My team is trained on that. We've done a lot of work on how to have a good partnership. We've done seminars on how to give good feedback. So I don't think that falls on the agencies. I think it's a two-way street, and we try to, especially with our junior folks, make sure that they're trained and know how to manage a good relationship.
I would say it's always an ongoing process because you are grooming and growing teams internally as well. So that's something that we continually focus on in setting the expectation of how we view our relationships with our partners. And that is a skill set that is learned for sure. And that's something that we're continually training on. So it is shared. To me, it's the last part of that question was, is it set to the agency? It really is shared by both the client and the agency, because I would ask the same to my agency partner. Are your teams trained to engage with the client in an open and honest way?
So I think it's a really great question that was asked here, and we just happen to have two clients who think about this. It's not by accident that they were invited to this particular panel, because they think about agency relationships. But I can empathize with all of you agency folks who have clients who they might answer the same way they did, but we know it's not true, which is that they actually don't spend any time teaching their people how to write a brief. They don't teach their people, spend any time teaching their folks how to evaluate creative based on a brief. And people are just expected to learn that on the job. There's no course in college on how to evaluate creative that I know of, or how to give really good feedback to a partner. All of this is something that has to be trained and learned on the job. And interestingly, I think agencies can help clients here. And in fact, our very first engagement with Sargento came at the recommendation of one of their agencies, who said because they had a great relationship, said to one of the women that worked, reported to Chip, said, your folks don't actually know how to give good feedback. And so we think that would be a good thing for you to learn, and they recommended us, which is how we actually met Sargento, was through an agency recommendation. This is something you can help clients learn how to do. In some cases, agencies do that training themselves for a client, and it's a really great thing to do because it helps, it's that when the water level rises, all the boats float higher, right? So it's a really great addition to bring to your clients, is to teach them how to give good feedback. What's the one thing agencies do that you love the most? And then I'll turn it around for you, Jamie. So what's one thing agencies do that you love the most?
I think I love it when I see a partner really engaged in our business and understanding it. One of our reviews, the pitch came in and they had gone to stores, they had bought the product, they had given the products to their own children. And granted, I do toys, so that it's a little more fun, easier to do this. But it really showed that they were invested in trying to understand who we were as we came to the table.
Chip?
I guess two things come to mind. One is I love it when an agency is excited about an idea. I think you can really feel it when they come in and pitch it. And I love that, and we can tell when the agency really loves the idea. And then the second may seem counterintuitive. I love to be challenged. I love when an agency challenges something, a direction that we've given them, or feedback that we've given them. I mean, of course, there comes a time where you have to stop the arguing, but in terms of challenging things, I think it's really important, and I really like when an agency does that.
So Jamie, what's the one thing that you love most about working with clients from an agency point of view?
Well, I think, when we're going through pitches, to be introduced to them and see the passion that they've got for their business. And a lot of times, they have some big challenges, but to see the positivity and optimism, it does bleed in to the entire team if they're able to see that.
Good. So we're going to close with takeaways from each of the panelists. There's one thing, a takeaway that I just feel like I need to share is that this is an intentional process. For you to build a great relationship with your clients requires an intentional process on the part of your agency. And it's got to be something that you think about doing and figure out where it fits into the cadence of your work. If you're paying attention because things are bad, you might be too late. So how do you keep it going in a way that's constantly that feedback circle that Steve showed on one of those slides, so that there's no surprises. Everybody knows what's going on. There are bad days and good days, and bumps in the road are just something you deal with the same way you do with someone that you love and trust. And how do you put that into place? But you have to think about it to do that. So let's go to the takeaway slides. I think they're in the, Jan, I think you're first up. So key takeaway.
Oh my gosh, I can't even read it. So really, my focus here is it's about the relationship. It's about communication and listening. If you think about any personal relationship that you have, what are the key components in that? And that's being open, being willing to listen, and making sure that we're really clear about the challenges that we're facing together. And it becomes more constructive and more of a true partnership in that way.
Okay. Jamie, I think you're next.
So my takeaway is when you win a pitch, a lot of times you have senior engagement and involvement, and the minute you win, those people move on. If you can dedicate at least one, possibly two people to stay on that business for 3 to 6 months, I think that really helps start the relationship off right. It keeps that excitement, and these people have a very intimate knowledge of every decision, every challenge, every discussion, every negotiation, and every promise made. So to lose that immediately, I think you're starting at a deficit. So at least if you can give it some time, that's really helpful.
Great, thank you.
Can I respond to Jamie's real quick?
Yep.
That's so important. I think continuity of people is just so important to a relationship, and to get that level of comfort. And like the original pitch team from Ogilvy that pitched us like 5.5 years ago, I think 4 of the 5 people are still on my team that pitched. So it's really, really important and great. So.
Okay.
All right, so my takeaway is about really spending the time to get to know your clients. There's that famous quote that it's not personal, it's business. I really don't think that's true. That's why it's called a relationship. It is personal. And I think it's like any kind of regular relationship that you would have. There's ups and downs and highs and lows and arguments and apologies, but being respectful and honest and having open communication is critical. And I would encourage everybody really get to know your clients, their business, but also what they're like as people, and that's the win-win.
Okay. I think we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank the panelists for coming in, and thank all of you for your attention. And I think
I have one quick shout out to Matt Kasendorf and the 4A's for putting together just a fantastic paper on client agency relationship management. It's in front of you. It's brilliantly done. Little applause for Matt and the team. Thank you.